I have over 3,000 hours in Elden Ring, and I have never thought about Caelid this much. I've thought of so many aspects of Elden Ring so much. Caelid is one of the first locations that really have, I guess, my writer brain thinking, wondering how it all functions, right? Compared to everything else in this game that is under the Golden Order, this isn't, right? First, let's start off with theories I found from other people who were very curious and interested. And we're going on Reddit, unfortunately, but usually this is where most of the conversation goes. If someone asked, what did Caelid look like before Scarlet Rot, Reddit is the perpetrator here, right? So, what are some theories that other people have thought? Well, there's some theories when the closer you get to the Bestial Sanctum and Dragon Barrow, the less it seems that it is influenced by Scarlet Rot. Now, we can check this out right now, because I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I personally don't agree with that. It looks pretty rotted still, in my opinion. There's more wildlife, maybe, in that sense. There's bears that aren't rotted. Why are you mad at me? What do you do? Get out, get it. No, leave me alone. I'm not red. No, no, leave me alone. I did not expect Buddy to throw hands. Goddamn. So, let's check it out. Let's see. Is Dragon Barrow different from the rest of the land? There is greenery, as you can see, around the Bestial Sanctum here. There's flowers here. They're red, but they don't seem like they're like Caelid colored red here. And it's very interesting to see because it's still rotted and still clearly highly influenced by rot. I think it is interesting because I remember last stream I did, I noted that, right, Dragon Barrow rains. And the reason why that's interesting is because the main part of Caelid, have you ever seen that part of Caelid rain ever? No. You probably haven't, and I haven't either. If you have, show me, because that is very interesting. Meanwhile, Dragon Barrow does rain, which is very fascinating in my opinion. But does that mean that that's because this world is less influenced? Maybe. Even if you look at the sky here, it's not red, but maybe that's just the time of day. We can change the time of day right now, thanks to Elden Ring's daytime changing feature here, if you sit on a grace. And look at this. There are trees here. They're not dying or dead or decaying or rot infested. So I think that Redditor does have somewhat of a point here that he's making here. I think he does have some ground to stand on when he starts saying that this area is less infected by rot. And I would agree. It seems like the ground is mostly the only thing infected here. Meanwhile, there's still growing plant life, and there's not really any mutated animals here either. It's just Caelid. But if Caelid was normal and not full of monstrous creatures, this is very interesting considering this is the farthest point from this Ionia swamp. It is very interesting in that fact. Therefore, it does mean that, of course, it would have the least amount of influence going on here, but still some amount of influence. And you could say the same for Redmane Castle, or more specifically, the Wailing Dunes, where Radahn resides here. I think it's very interesting. So let's go until noon here and see if the sky is red. It isn't red. That is interesting. Did I do that right? Hold on a minute, folks. Let's try that again. The sky isn't red here. Let's try until morning. The sky's still not red. That is an interesting design choice here to make this place less infected by the rot, essentially. It's definitely purposeful, so I think that Redditor did have ground to stand here. More than I thought he did, honestly. It's very interesting. Someone else said, the swamp of Ionia was once flourishing plains filled with rich flora and fauna, now reduced to death and decay. Now this I am very inclined to agree with here, and we'll get into it for a moment here, but I don't think the swamp of Ionia existed before Malenia's Ionia Flower Bomb nuke, right? I don't think it existed at all. And this might be a very argumentative choice here, like you couldn't fight me on it, but I don't think it existed. And we'll get to that in a moment here. But in my personal opinion, I don't think there was ever a swamp in Caelid until Malenia blasted off her nuke. So I do believe that it was just plains here, or a mountain, and we'll get to that in a moment here. There may have been a mountain here instead of what we see now as the swamp, which is a crazy thing to say. But bear with me here for a moment. I do have an idea here, and I will talk about it, because the idea that there was a mountain here in Caelid would be very interesting. Implications-wise, anyways. Not really anything else. Lore-wise, very interesting. Another theory was that aside from the fungal growths and rotting swamps, there wouldn't be much difference. So basically nothing changed, except for the rot stuff that exists, and the entire swamp itself. And now we have the desert theories that some people pointed out, that Caelid, the entirety of Caelid, was all just desert, which I don't agree with, but here's what people have to say. A lot of people assume Caelid was a desert region before the battle between Malenia and Radahn, mostly because of this area here, so it makes sense. It is a very interesting area, but for all we know, this could easily have been a sort of shore area, and the blast of the Ionia flower that Malenia created just moved so much sand to the east that it created the dunes. So I think they have some right idea here, but I also don't think the entirety of Caelid was a desert. People have pointed out that the clothes are different, food, or the materials around the area are different. And you can say, oh, that was probably because, well, the place turned into the Caelid we know now, so that's why everything's all different. I don't quite agree with that either, in my opinion. It's very interesting, but I don't agree with that either. I think that Caelid right now is a dry place, and you can kind of assume so just by the fact that the ground is red, but you can also say the ground is red because of rot. So it's like, apparently it was also called the Caelid Wastes at some point, so people do think it may have been a desert or a plain. And once again, I still don't quite agree with that. And I'll tell you how I feel about it in just a moment here. It's very interesting that people think it's a desert, and there's clearly some weight to it. It used to be called, if that's true, that it used to be called the Caelid Wastes. It's a very interesting thing to call it, though I don't think it entirely implies that this place used to be a desert, if that was true. And now we have other theories. Caelid means the heavens, so it must have been a stunning, beautiful, and prosperous place in ancient times, someone said and pointed out. I don't know where exactly the word Caelid comes from, but if this is true, then the idea that the swamp was here before Caelid, clearly it can't be, right? Because swamps, people really don't imagine swamps as a heavenly place, right? And I think that just adds fuel to what I'm about to get into in a moment here, about this swamp simply not existing. There's other theories as well. People thinking it's not a desert because there's so much calcified crap, that's what they said, crap in the area, and trees, even though they're rotten, they're still there. It doesn't seem like it was a place desert with only like 3 lone cacti or something. Alright, now, what did Caelid look like before the rot? This is my main thing right here. First things first, I genuinely don't think the swamp of Ionia existed. This is my theory. This is my big theory for every area in the game. 3 parts of this area. The Wailing Dunes, Dragon Barrow, and basically the swamp of Ionia, or main Caelid. Now, first things first, I don't think the swamp of Ionia existed. And why do I think that? Well, I did my research. I looked at so many swamps for this, and I said, Caelid doesn't look like a swamp. It's clearly mimicking a swamp, right? But it's not quite there, right? And you could say, oh, no, that's just game design. But clearly, by the earlier details we've seen with Dragon Barrow being less infected by the Scarlet Rot, game design is intentional for Elden Ring. And if it's intentional, then the game design of the swamp looking specifically like this is intentional. For example, if you've ever seen a very wide angle, it looks like it's becoming like a Haligtree or like an Erdtree, except a rot version of that, right? A rot Haligtree sort of thing, right? But clearly not, it hasn't entirely turned into a full tree, right? If you've ever seen it, it's very interesting to look at, and I've always looked at it for way too much time. Now look around here, right? You're looking around here, and what do you think is wrong? Why do you think, I don't think, that it's a swamp? First of all, ruins. They put ruins on a swamp. It's hard to believe that there used to be something more here, right, in this swamp. These are stone buildings that were built atop of water. It's hard to believe. I'm not saying that it's impossible that people have built on top of swamps, or I think not Alexander the Great. Something was created over a swamp by some big name general of history, and it killed so many people of them trying to make it. So I'm not saying it's impossible, that idea that people would do this, right? I'm thinking it's strange that they would try to do this at all, period, right? They clearly built something huge, at least big enough to take up a large, fairly decent portion of the swamp here, until I can only assume the bomb went off, right? Which turned this structure into ruins, the Malenia bomb. And if this is true, then once again adds to the idea that this wasn't always a swamp to me. It really isn't. It doesn't feel like that to me. The idea that there would be ruins here, a structure here on top of water, that's not good architecture. And Elden Ring knows good architecture. If you've seen any part of the game, if you've seen fucking Altus Plateau, right, you've seen big ass architecture with details upon details, and you're telling me that some dumbass in Caelid was all like, you know what? I think I'm going to build on a swamp, because that's a brilliant idea. Now, once again, not impossible. Humans have tried to do it before. I bet humans have done it before. It's definitely possible, but it's improbable, and it's unrealistic, right? That's why I think, no, there wasn't a swamp here before Malenia's bomb, before the Ionia flower sprouted. But there's more to it, in my opinion. There's more to this theory than just that. Alright. Look around again. What do you notice? Did you spot it yet? The lack of trees. Now you say, oh, well, the Ionia flower bomb destroyed all the trees. I would agree with you there. I would 1000% agree with you there. Except, and hear me out here, there's not very much of these trees, of these little like things poking out. Would you call these trees? It's hard to call these trees, right? Because they're mutated trees. So there was clearly trees here, but not quite the same as swamp trees. They're very similar to swamp trees, I would say. Not quite the same. They seem to have grown. Most of the stuff here seems to have grown from the Ionia flower that Malenia bloomed. That's my opinion anyways. That's why they're mostly Caelid, rotted mushroom tree things, right? Instead of some normal ash trees you can see around Caelid that are yet to be rotted but have lost their leaves, right? Things are just very different here. And I have a theory as to what this place was before that could attribute what these trees could have been if they were there, but not quite a swamp tree. It doesn't help with my swamp tree idea as a whole. A swamp theory as a whole. I really believe there wasn't a swamp here. There's more stuff to go about it. There really is. Notice how it's shallow. You ever think about that? You ever notice how the entire swamp is shallow? There's not a single part of this swamp that kind of indicates, oh, it's deep, or at least it's deep enough to have held wildlife in before the bomb went off, before Malenia's Ionia flower bomb went off, right? There's not a single area where you could fall off and die, essentially is what I'm playing this to here. Which makes me think that this rot sludge had just flooded over the ground after Melania's flower bloomed. That is my opinion here. I think that is what happened, because there's not really anything to indicate, oh, there was once wildlife, the normal swamp wildlife, anywhere around here. Not even bones. And a bunch of bones are scattered around Caelid to indicate that there was once life here. But not here, no. There's not a single bone here to indicate anything at all. And I think this is purposeful. Once again, the design for this game is purposeful. They're trying to tell you something here. And what do you think they're trying to tell you here? When you see all of this and put these ideas together, there was not a swamp here. That is my opinion here. There was never a swamp here. And I think the Ionia flower that bloomed from Melania, this is what created the swamp. The flower created the swamp. That is my opinion on that. Oh, also, some other things that did not exist in Caelid. The poison bloom. If you guys don't know what the poison bloom is, it's one of the crafting materials that can be attained all over the place. But read the item description of the poison bloom. Do we have a poison bloom on us? Let's hope. There we go. Flower that grows in toxic terrain. Material used for crafting items, dripping with a deep green poisonous liquid. Now, the deep green poisonous liquid, right? Obviously, it's not red. And I think this might have been an oversight or they didn't really care too much about what color the flowers would be spewing. Maybe they didn't think it mattered too much, honestly. But they've been pretty decent at creating variants of some things. Look at this. The faded early flower and the normal early flower, right? It's very interesting here, but the poison bloom, I believe, didn't exist before basically pre-rot Caelid, because it wouldn't be able to thrive in a Caelid without rot. Same thing with another thing here. Are you ready for it? The toxic mushroom. Are you ready for the description of this? A mushroom covered in toxic mold that grows in rotten lands. See? There it goes again. Another thing that was only able to flourish and grow here in rot Caelid, right? In Caelid present tense. But in pre-rot Caelid, this would have never been a thing. It couldn't have grown because there was no Ionia flower bomb. So that's just some details I noticed when doing all this research. But there's more. Not more things that didn't exist, just more things I have to say. But this time we're going to Dragon Barrow. Because Dragon Barrow is very interesting in my opinion. And the lore things around it is super interesting, I think. And hopefully, I hope, you agree with my theory here that Ionia flower was essentially what it was. Or the Swamp of Ionia, I'm sorry. The Swamp of Ionia was never a swamp, and instead it was, who knows. In fact, I have that coming up later, and I'm going to tell you what the main part of Caelid is going to be. And I don't think it was a swamp. I think it was something else entirely. Something that makes more sense, in my opinion. But for now, we are in Dragon Barrow. And Dragon Barrow, in my opinion, I think Dragon Barrow has a really good chance of being similar to the limestone dotted grasslands on Earth. Here on Earth. And why, you might be asking, wait, why do you think that? Let's go to the Bestial Sanctum. Alright, I think that this Dragon Barrow is super similar to the limestone karst fields. If you ever look up karst and limestone fields or limestone dotted grasslands and go to Bestial Sanctum, look at this. Notice these pillar-esque things. We can get real close to them here. It's very interesting, right? It's obviously there's a weird dead shit in them, right? And that itself is very interesting, but it's weird how they're popped up like this, right? Well, it's my theory, and hear me out for a moment here, that these are in fact not any man-made structures or Garunk-made structures, clearly. I think, or if they were, I think And hear me out. They are limestone. They're limestone things, limestone structures, right? Limestone in general. I think that all of these things poking itself out of the land here is limestone. And perhaps it was carved to match the style of the bestial sanctum, right? I believe that the limestone was popped up from the ground, like in any other location you've ever seen. If you've ever seen dotted grasslands with limestone in it, I believe limestone was already here and it was carved by who knows who, because we know Gurranq ain't doing this. And once it was carved, they put bodies in there. I don't know. You can theorize what the bodies are. I think they look like they're beastmen bodies. They look very similar to beastmen bodies. You could theorize what the symbolism of it means. But I think it was limestone. And I think they were there naturally and then carved by Gurranq and Destined Death people. Oh shit, he's still mad at me. I thought he was gonna be chill. Buddy, you gotta relax. Damn, I was getting ready. Shit. Chill out, buddy. He dodged. Alright, take this then. You want a piece of me? Oh, he's kicking my ass. God damn. See, that's what I think Dragon Barrow is. I think it used to be a grassland of sorts, with some trees clearly, because there's clearly trees here. I was looking at the place. A grassland of sorts that had limestone popping out. You can see it here clearly, as clear as day, right? I believe specifically, for the record, that it is the limestone dotted grasslands. Alright, let's move on to another location. And I think this one's the most interesting location, despite being the most bare bones location, to say the least. Alright, here we are, the Wailing Dunes. This is the place where Malenia and Radahn did not fight, apparently. Because if they fought here in the Swamp of Ionia, what is this place exactly? It is believed to have been another battleground, and of course it's Radahn's final resting place. But the Wailing Dunes is very interesting, because what is it, right? I've already said that there's no way Caelid was a desert. It makes no sense to me, in my opinion. So what is it? I think it's just a shore. I think it's a beach of sorts. Not really anything too crazy, I know. But there's actually more to this than you actually think. Now look at the water. Alright, I want you to look at the water here. I am a big fan of water. I've recently been drinking water, like the one, 3.7 liters that is recommended, right? I've never been the greatest fan of water. I've always been like a junk food type of person, right? But I'm trying to break that habit, so I've been a big fan of water recently. And look at this water here, right? Notice how it's blue, and notice how the edges isn't really too red, the edges of the sand here. That's very interesting, in my opinion. And it's interesting because it sort of reminds me of something. And I discovered this when doing my research here. It reminded me of a certain thing. And we'll discuss it in a moment here. But have you ever asked yourself, why is the ground red for this sand? The sand, not the dirt in Caelid. You can say, oh yeah, dirt in Caelid is red because of the rot, right? Why is the sand red? It's very isolated, and if we're going with the idea that the farther you are, the less influenced you are by rot, then this place should be a bit brighter, you would think, right? And first I was thinking, is the sand red due to some natural reasons? And this is why I thought, oh, wait a minute. The reason sand is red in real life, in beaches around the Greece area, right, is because of volcanoes. Volcanic rock mixing into the sand. That's why the deserts you see that are red, because of volcanic rock mixing with the sand. You might be thinking, well, wait a minute. But then that would propose that there's a possible volcano exactly. A possible volcano location. But also remember, hey, wait a minute, aren't those the mountaintops of the giants? Yeah, they're pretty close, but I doubt We were able to, whatever fire shit was going on up there was able to reach this. Just in case you start making up theories there. Is it possible? Maybe. If the fire giants could throw that hard or some shit, and they're just throwing fire down here, and the fire just turns, or volcanic ass fucking fire, I guess, turns this whole place red. But remember, the only volcanic ass fire shit is from Rykard's group of miscreants, the recusants. They have magma spells, so there's no way fire giants caused the sand to be red, if you were wondering that, or the mountains for that matter, because they seemed to have been dormant for quite a long time. There's snow on top of them, and there's not really any place that is not covered in snow up there to reveal, oh, a volcano didn't recently blow up and some volcanic rock ended up in Caelid. Once again, possible, but improbable. Now, I think what happened here is not the sand becoming red due to volcanic rock, but something else entirely, which could have insane implications. Frankly, have you ever heard of the foraminifera? Let me repeat that one more time. The foraminifera. Apparently, sand becomes a pink or red color due to tiny single-celled organisms known as the foraminifera. They are single-cell organisms which build shells around themselves from the minerals they find in the water. The minerals they find in the water. Remember this, right? The minerals they find in the water. Usually these shells are made up of calcium carbonate with the shell color ranging from pink to red. Once again, notice how the water is not like rock-colored water, or it's not rot water or anything. It's blue-ass water. I believe that the foraminifera have been keeping this water safe from any rot-infested material. I believe so. And they've been bringing it to the desert here, or the beach, whatever you want to call this, and turning the sands here pinkish or reddish. You can choose there. Isn't that a crazy implication here? That these single-celled organisms are able to stop the rot from reaching other lands. Isn't that interesting? It would be so interesting. Imagine swimming in this water, right? I can imagine myself swimming in this water, and I can feel like I would be safe from never being infected by the rot. Well, now, standing on the desert, or shit, even breathing the air of Caelid is probably bad for you, and we'll get to that in a moment here. It's most likely bad to you, but can you imagine it? Entering this water, and you go down in, have you ever seen YouTube videos about caves, and how the water in caves are so clean and unpolluted? This is exactly what it is. It's so untouched by the rot, and I believe it's because of single cell organisms like the fucking foraminifera. I believe so. I think these organisms are actually protecting the water from being infected by the rot. That's the only answer for why this water is blue, but the sands of Caelid is red. And if you don't agree with me, then I don't know. You must be blind, son. That's the only scientific answer. It has to be. And I'm no scientist, I'm no genius. I'm a damn English major. But I did my research, and it feels to me that's why the water is blue and the sands of Caelid is red. Because of those single-cell organisms. And it makes me think, wait, single-cell organisms, rot material, how have these single-cell organisms not been infected with rot or mutated with rot? They must be, right? And if they are, what's happening to them? Because they use material they find in the water to create shells for themselves, right? So that means the rot material they could be gathering here is a part of them now. And in that sense, they're basically mutated single-celled organisms. And then makes you wonder, wait a minute, if this is true, that means rot. This is the huge implication here, that rot attacks you on a cellular level. The very cells are being attacked. Like any disease, really. It's like any sorts of disease, except it attacks everything on a cellular level. It attacks fast, and it's deadly to anything, right? And once again, sand, by the way, is not soil, right? You could go up there and look at the soil of Caelid. It's red, right? And I've had this argument with someone before. It's all like, oh, but Caelid doesn't affect organisms. It doesn't affect non-organic things, right? And it's like, oh, what about the crystal things, the chrysalis guys, the mages or whatever, right? The crystal enemies, right? And so, oh, but they're different because they're living crystal. Fair enough. The sand. There should be no reason that this sand is red, and yet it is. And I think it's because of the single-celled organisms mentioned before that makes it red. That's why this, and the implication of all of that means that this rot attacks on a cellular level. All of it is very interesting in my opinion, and that is my theory for the Wailing Dunes. Oh hey, it rains here too! Isn't that interesting, ladies and gentlemen? It rains here too. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Alright, it's time for us to move to a new location. This was my big one. This was the big one for me. Because I really did believe that this was it, right? And unless Malenia's Ionia flower bloomed on top of a mountain, right? Unless there's a mountain in Caelid right here, and they blew that to smithereens, Malenia's flower blew it to smithereens, and that exposed and blew out volcanic rock that landed on here. Unless there was a mountain here, then that is the only other way. Therefore, both of my theories could be correct either way. I think I'm gonna take credit for it. Both of my theories could be correct either way. If one theory doesn't go the one way, then the other theory works. If the other theory doesn't go one way, then the first theory works. And I think that's great for me. I'll take that as a goddamn win. Alright, so what do I think this place is? What do I think the entirety of Caelid is? We've talked about the Swamp of Ionia, Dragon Barrow, and the Wailing Dunes. What have I not talked about? And that is the main part of Caelid area, this slim area that is not the Swamp of Ionia. What is this area? And honestly, I think it's very plain and simple, and honestly, it could be so many answers. Except for desert and swamp. I believe it was a wooded area. And I think the best way to showcase this, let's just go to the Rot View balcony. I think it's a pretty decent way of showing this, because the Rot View balcony actually has two versions of trees. Alright, here we are. Now, before I say anything, can you tell me what's wrong with this place? Other than the fact that it's Caelid? I'll give you a hint. It's the trees. Look at this tree here. Notice something with it? I'll give you a hint. One more hint. It's normal. It's not infected by rot. There's no mushrooms growing out of it. It's a completely normal tree. And you might be like, oh, so what? Look down here. See what's over there? Can you take a guess what that is? Do we have our telescope? We should. There it is. You might be like, trees. So what? Notice how they are mushroom covered. Buddy, who do you think you are? Notice how they are mushroom-covered trees created by the rot. Notice how these are normal fucking trees, unaffected by rot. Still kind of affected. Clearly, they're dying. Obviously, you would die too if you had to live in Caelid as a tree. But look how the trees are so different. These spindly little fucking swamp trees you can see in the Swamp of Ionia. And yet, there's no water in sight. And here, these big, strong trees, but are slowly, tiny dying due to the horrible soil. Put two and two together, son. What do you guess? You can guess that these are fake trees, which once again supports that the Ionia flower created the swamp and is creating rot trees. And then these are real trees created and sprouted from the earth. Not from the rot, right? And it's this idea where you could just look at this tree and be like, so what does this do? Look at it, right? And when you look at these trees, what do you think? Not a swamp, not a desert. No way, this is a desert tree. No. I think it's more than that. It's not a forest either, because just the way of the land is, I don't think it was a desert, or I don't think it was a forest. Just are we back? Oh, we're so back. Cool. My Wi-Fi crashed on me, but we're somehow back. So, when you look at those trees, what do you think? What do those trees look like to you? Now, I was thinking trees are on almost every type of landscape, but I think these trees are somewhat similar to wooded groves. Now, if you ever looked at wooded groves before, there's some very interesting things here. You'll find that the trees look very similar to the Ionian trees that the Ionian swamp creates. Now, if you believe that, well then clearly it's not a swamp. Still, my theory that it's not a swamp is still active, right? It's still true in that sense. Just that the fact that my idea is that the trees were created from the swamp is less than true. But no, instead, these spindly little trees that are being rotted might be wooded grove trees you see in wooded groves. And mind you, by the way, this also allows for trees like this to exist. If you've ever if you go to Google and go to images of wooded groves, you can see trees as big as this, but also trees as big as those. So ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Caelid, for the most part, Caelid was not a desert, not a swamp. In fact, I believe it was a meadow mixed with wooded groves. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, why a meadow? Why did you suddenly say meadow? And this matters because if you go here specifically, I think this has what I'm looking for. I better have not picked it up. If I picked it up, it's going to be so dumb. But I think this is going to sort of apply to my theory. If not, we're going to have to go down below the Rot View balcony. Now, if you go to Lenne's Rise, you'll find something very interesting surrounding Lenne's Rise. Something that kind of adheres to my meadows and I keep want to say mangrove, but mangrove is clearly something else entirely, right? Mangrove is entirely different, and I think I just have Minecraft on my mind. Wooded groves. Look at this. Flowers. You see these flowers here? And flowers here. And if you go back here, oh look at that. A flower. But then if you go back here, Miquella's a lily. You might be like, oh, so there's a bunch of flowers and there's a lily. What's the difference? Why does it matter? Lilies need rich, very rich soil to grow. And not only is Miquella's lilies all over Caelid, there are also St. Trina lilies right over here in the Forsaken Ruins. To be fair, I will tell you, to be fair, the Forsaken Ruins does have St. Trina's sword. But the fact that her lilies are there, and were there, and continue to be here, as well as Miquella's lilies, has me to believe that this Caelid area, the entirety of Caelid, had rich and nutrient soil. So much so that flowers like Miquella's lily and St. Trina's lily and other fucking flowers like the Erdleaf flower, and even though they're around here, it still cuts to the theory, even if they're around this area, it just seems like the entire area had rich nutrient soil. Why does this matter? It means that flowers were probably a big thing. Clearly there's flowers all over the place. Even now, even though the place is rotted, you can still find rot flowers, interestingly enough. And so just sometimes you can find other just random ass flowers that are also red, that just so happen to be red or orange, right? All over the place here. And a lot of grass, clearly. In that sense, it makes me believe that this place was in fact a meadow mixed with a wooded grove. And it explains these types of trees as well. It hugely explains these types of trees, right? If you look at a wooded grove like trees, they look like this, or they look like the big ass trees I showed you before, right? Now let's go to the Forsaken Ruins here to tell you what I'm talking about when it comes to St. Trina flowers here. We go below here and go past the wild life here. You'll find the sword of St. Trina in the Forsaken Ruins. But most importantly, Trina's lilies. Oh, hey, leave me alone, buddy. Damn, leave me alone, pal. Tish, you got this. Oh, Tish, where'd you go? Tish, get him. Yeah, you got this. So, there's St. Trina flowers growing, there's Erd Leaf tree flowers growing, or just Erd Leaf flowers growing, and there's Mikola flowers growing, as well as other plant life growing here. Or, are they growing? The answer is no, they are not growing. And this is important. Alright, look at the description of Trina's lily and Mikola's lily. Trina's lily. A pale purple water lily that is on the verge of wilting. Material used for crafting items. Right? There it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's a wilting. Now read Mikola's lily. A delicate water lily of unalloyed gold that has started to fade and wilt. Once again, it's a wilting, ladies and gentlemen. Now look at the Erd Leaf flower. An Erd Leaf flower that has faded into a pale scarlet found blooming in rotten lands. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing is growing here. You can see the grass is red, but it's dying. Everything here is dying, and this includes the flowers. The flowers here were once blooming, right? You would see Erd Leaf flowers, or St. Trina's flowers, or Mikola's flowers all over the place, and they would be blooming before Malenia's scarlet rot blasted the area. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what I believe this is, and that adheres to the sort of area that this is, in my opinion, on the record, a wooded grove mixed with a meadow. The entirety of Caelid, with some exceptions like Bestial Sanctum area and such. And some people agree with this theory. They're like, it's next to Mistwood, right? It's a foresty area, so it would make sense if Caelid used to be not a foresty area, but, you know, wooded groves, which is basically like a forest. If I'm gonna put it simply for you, and for myself simply, it's basically a forest. And Caelid is right next to a forest area. It makes sense to me that that's what Caelid is, and that's what it was before being destroyed by Malenia's Ionia flower. But now you might be asking yourself, that's cool, the land, we understand why the land is red, the real water is blue, and the fake water is just sludge. This is raw sludge, let's be honest here, fellas. Alright, you've explained all of this, you might be telling me, but what the fuck is going on with the sky? The sky is red. Hello, Tish. The sky is red. Absolutely red. Right? And it's the only place that's red. Except when you go to Dragon Barrow, which we've explained is less infected by the rot, so maybe that's why it's not red. But if that is the case, why is the sky red? In general, why is the sky red? If only the ground and the animals on the ground were affected. Well, I have a theory. It's not the case, right? I'm calling it, that's right, I'm calling it, alright, the Foraminifera theory. If there are single-celled organisms like the Foraminifera that are mutated by rot, then what are the implications of this? We've already talked about some things about this, right? But this is important because the sky is red, obviously, right? But have you ever looked up why the sky is red in real life? You ever see wow, I did the research. And apparently it means that there is still dust and particles in the air. Seemingly, that's it. Seemingly due to high pressure. So that would mean that there are dusts and other particles in the air almost every day in Caelid due to high pressure. Isn't that strange to imagine that, right? The entire landscape of Caelid has higher pressure than fucking the mountaintops of fucking giants, or Altus Plateau for that matter. Can you imagine that if it has that much high pressure in the air? It would also explain why Caelid is described as a dry and arid place by people who have tried to take a knack at this idea of what Caelid was before the rots. It's because it is a dry and arid place. There's so many things to look at to prove that, and the sky is just one of the many examples, and no one really talks about it. I'm sure here, let me look it up right now. Why is the sky red in Caelid? Let's see if anyone answered. Now, people have looked up that apparently people have asked that Caelid sky is it even real that it's red? Obviously it's red. Just look at the sky. But this was in early Elden Ring years, the very beginning of Elden Ring, when it just came out and shit was still being updated as it came out, and a lot of things changed, right? And someone has said the sky is only red because of the mass corpses lit on fire in certain areas. Otherwise, it's like a murky brown in most areas. Murky brown? We went to Dragonbarrow, fellas. That is not murky brown. We know this much. So that guy is wrong. So no one's really asked a question of why the sky is red. They've just asked about visual issues for Elden Ring, in which it wasn't really a visual issue. It just became nighttime. That's it. It just became nighttime. That's why the sky wasn't red. But I think I know the answer. And I believe it's because of this high pressure caused by the flower. Right? And hear me out here. Or the sky was already red. It was a very interesting problem for Caelid if the sky was already red. I don't think so. I think that the sky was red after the Ionia bomb. But the chances of the sky being red, once again, not impossible, but definitely improbable. But it would explain the trailer where we see Malenia up against Radahn, and the sky is clearly red, right? Just say there's oversight on From Software there, but you could maybe Caelid was always red, at least in terms of the sky, and it's always had a higher pressure than other places. That could be very interesting to look into, but I didn't because I personally believe, no, the sky is red because of the Ionia flower. Because that makes sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to you, you should probably look into that other idea, that it was red before the flower. And good luck to you if you find a probability to that.
I hate the...
But honestly, that's it. That's all I had to say about this. This was the most fun I ever had discussing something. Every time I do these discussion streams, I start off real slow, but then I continue passionate. This one I was passionate before the stream to talk about because I was just getting so deep into it.